What if Red Square in Moscow, once the beating heart of Russian might, is now alive with the vibrant dances of thousands from India, not as tourists, but as the silent tide replacing a generation of men lost to the brutal Ukraine war? Could this influx of workers from halfway across the world truly be Putin's desperate ploy to rebuild Russia's crumbling workforce? Shocking revelations from sources like France 24 claim some are being funneled straight into the deadly trenches of Ukraine. Dive into this tale where economic desperation meets shadowy geopolitics, and discover how India's government turns a blind eye to its citizens traded for cheap labor deals. Prepare for details that will leave you gasping, where the scent of foreign spices mingles with the bitter cold of Russian winters, and the distant hum of warplanes echoes over factory lines. In the bustling core of Moscow, where Kremlin walls have for ages embodied power's unbreakable facade, a startling transformation unfolds just beyond them. Instead of solemn parades, Indians now throng Red Square, their rhythmic dances capturing attention under a headline decrying Putin's scheme to erase the void of Ukraine's sacrificed youth. But these vivid scenes are merely the surface ripple, teasing deeper waves of worker queues and dormitory scenes that reveal Russia's quiet labor handover. The narrative expands far beyond industrial floors, with alarming reports from outlets such as France 24 hinting that segments of this Indian migration flow directly to Ukraine's battlefronts. As we explore Russia's acute manpower crisis and New Delhi's indifference to its nationals dispatched as frontline fillers, the revelations grow increasingly harrowing. Ready to witness eyewitness footage exposing Russia's workforce state? Let's plunge in. This isn't just any passport line, it's Russia's stark new norm. Filmed at Moscow's immigration hub, a relentless stream of humanity captures the Kremlin's eagerly embraced migrant wave, with 10,000 Indians patiently queuing to embed in Russia's hemorrhaging workforce. What does this orchestrated influx signify for a nation hemorrhaging fighters? With Russian males depleted by conflict, this number pales. Authorities echo this, as Russia's first deputy prime minister Denis Manturov noted the need for hundreds of thousands more laborers. Economic Times corroborates the purely financial drive behind this gateway to wealth. Strolling streets of St. Petersburg, these newcomers, including tech experts from their homelands, lure with promises of 100,000 rubles monthly, $1,240 roughly, and enticing some even amid Russia's struggles. Hindustan Times backs this up, yet the pledge's extremity stands out against ruble devaluation and runaway inflation. As the central bank battles monetary erosion, the Kremlin offers this salary lifeline to combat shortages, though field data signals insufficiency. Projections anticipate 40,000 additional arrivals from India by 2026 alone, with global media affirming these estimates. Boris Tidov's proposal to emulate Dubai's model shows elite endorsement, highlighting deep policy roots. The lived reality of integration shines in housing snapshots, where corridors morph into bustling mini-markets teeming with activity. Stoves balanced precariously emit the spicy aroma of traditional curries, shoes scattered haphazardly underfoot, and crowds touching elbows in narrow spaces evoke a permanent cultural transplant. The palpable warmth of cooking fires contrasts the winter's frigid bite, dense clusters pressing close in living quarters. Russia's soldiers deployed afar leave empty slots filled by this distant populace, pragmatic survival supplanting ideological purity amid these confined halls. Economic pressures dictate this as vital, not optional. Mobilization and Ukraine's war have shattered industrial foundations, with Moscow Times reporting a 72,000 workforce quota from India to project control, yet overflow and rapid arrival rates render it illusory. Over the past year, India's presence surged 25%, poised to double by 2025's close, as Times of India predicts a million-strong workforce. Ural Chamber of Commerce president's statements validate ambitions, targeting industrial hubs like Sverdlovsk for fulfillment. Why this jolt to Russia's labor sphere? Russian male depletion forces reliance on external hands for machinery in Sverdlovsk and fabrics in Ivanovo, where textile factories display sole dependence on Indian operatives amid 800,000 vacancies in machines, electronics, and builds. Russia's superpower image fractures quietly here, citizens sidelined while factories hum with imported toil. But the narrative's darkest chapter unfolds in Ukraine's mud-choked foxholes. Claims allege some lured workers morph into cannon fodder, verified by independent press. Eyewitness video unveils the anguish, with an Indian worker lamenting fate sealed. We all know the end, he warns, recounting comrades dispatched to war zones, perished or vanished, unattended by New Delhi. Russia's million casualty toll drives this tactic, manipulating migrants as expendable. Individual accounts amplify the terror. One young man's story details a friend's doomed post-contract with the Ministry of Defense. Hoping for funds, he perished within a week, untrained. He lost his life just 10 days in, the narrator reveals, in Donetsk's Pokrovsk front, unprepared soldiers amid war's roar, partnerless and fatal lessons. Now missing, alongside 5 others. This utilization of unchecked laborers might patch gaps in industry and trenches, a sinister byproduct of Putin's Modi diplomacy. Visa-free pacts and Indian visits legitimize this traffic. Kremlin gains sanction-defying labor and affordable troops for Ukraine's grind. India secures oil, diamonds, fertilizer bargains, but at the cost of untrained youths in unknown fronts. Amid clickbait headlines, this Red Square revelry dissolves into Donetsk's grit. Putin's Russia rises not on citizens, but imported dupes, waged and war-bound. Yet, as critics charge frontline diversions, a twist looms. Could this alliance's underbelly ignite backlash, exposing forbidden exchanges? What hidden deals sustain this facade, as lives barter for power? In humanitarian outcry, India's silenced response fuels suspicions of complicity. Workers, scenting danger from afar, trust fleeting offers. Amid Korzinkas and borders crossed, tactile grips on documents feel heavy with illusion, soft papers hiding steel fate. Sounds of chutney sizzles fade to gunfire reports. Unraveling more, sources whisper coordinated recruitment rings masking as job fairs. Is this marginal abuse or systemic betrayal? As econ-choked reports emerge, a cliffhanger question burns. Will whistleblowers expose chains of command, or continue the cycle of sacrifice in Russia's twilight empire? Picture this, Russia's desperation shines through as the Kremlin orchestrates a massive influx of Indian workers, reaching 27,000 now. Is that enough? No way, with Russian men yanked away by the war's grip. Officials agree, this scramble screams the truth. But hold on. What if the promise of riches masks a darker trap? As Russia's first deputy prime minister, Denis Manturov, warned publicly, Moscow aches for hundreds of thousands of hands to plug its gaping labor voids. Even the Economic Times nods, it's pure economics fueling this rush. Wander St. Petersburg streets, and you'll spot them, the new workforce, fresh from India, some topping their fields as IT wizards back home, lured by vows of 100,000 rubles a month. That's a jaw-dropper in Russian rubles, confirmed by Hindustan Times. Converts to roughly $1,240, yet taste the bitterness here. Inflation rattles Russia's central bank, the ruble crumbling under weighty pressures. So yeah, the Kremlin doles out cash to mend its broken labor force. But does it cut deep? Field whispers say no, this flood might drown short. Rumors buzz of another 40,000 Indians pouring in by 2026 alone. Global outlets back this data. And here's the twist, Boris Titov, Russia's presidential envoy for entrepreneurs' rights, pitches it bold, saying Moscow could rise like Dubai. Signals that the elite embrace this shift. Now, feel the pulse of change in the guts of integration. Snapshots from Russia's underbelly expose the riot, the dorms handed to Indian workers morph into mini food havens. Narrow hallways echo with sizzling pots. The spicy aroma of cardamom and cumin curling through the air, feet shuffling amid cluttered shoe piles as dozens stir traditions on stoves. Not a fleeting spot, it's a soul-shifting swap. The humid crush of bodies, the clang of lids, the sticky warmth, it erodes Russia's core in its capital's heart. As warriors from home storms crash into Ukraine's front, these arrivals sardine the voids, crafting an imported lifeline that humiliates Russia's boasts of self-reliance. Yet, is this rescue real, or a sham cloaking horrors? The trenches await. The scale of migration into Russia is staggering and deeply transformative. In the heart of Moscow, Indian workers are now the new residents. Their dormitories aren't just temporary shelters, they are full-fledged living spaces. Narrow corridors are filled with the aroma of spices and frying food, piles of shoes, and bustling kitchens where dozens cook their traditional meals. This is now the norm. While Russian men are fighting valiantly on front lines, a foreign workforce takes their place. The once vibrant streets, bustling factories, and crowded dorms are now brimming with newcomers from thousands of kilometers away. The ideological notion of a Russian world is giving way to harsh survival tactics. Economic necessity drives this wave of migration, not choice. The reality is grim. Western sanctions and military mobilization in Ukraine have crippled industry. The Kremlin announced a quota of 72,000 Indian workers to regain control of the economy, but evidence suggests this number has already been surpassed. Field reports indicate that the actual inflow is much higher, and still accelerating. Over the past year, the Indian population in Russia has grown by 25%, with expectations to double by 2025. Insiders reveal an even more startling forecast: up to 1 million Indian workers could be in Russia soon. This would be one of the largest coordinated labor movements in recent history. Authorities are rushing to meet this target, especially in industrial hubs like the Sverdlovsk region. But why the dramatic shock to Russia's labor market? The answer lies in the dwindling number of Russian men available for work. With so many fighting on the front lines, the country's workforce has been decimated, forcing a reliance on foreign labor like never before. As the influx continues, questions loom. How deep does this radical shift go? Are these new workers just filling factories, or is the country's future being quietly rewritten, from within the trenches of industry to the front lines of war itself? The story is far from over, and the next chapter promises a startling revelation. The relentless effort to fill its labor shortage is pushing Russia into uncharted waters. In the industrial heartlands like Sverdlovsk, the impact is unmistakable. But why is the country suddenly facing such a devastating crisis? The answer lies in a sharp decline of Russian men in its workforce, caused by ongoing conflict. Across the country, factories sit deserted. Heavy machinery stalls as Russian men fight abroad. The void is being filled with foreign workers, primarily from India, whose presence is transforming regions like Sverdlovsk and Ivanovo. Photos from a textile plant reveal packed corridors. Inside, Indian workers cook traditional meals in narrow hallways, piles of shoes on the floor, stoves crackling. These are not transient accommodations, they are permanent, expanding communities. The headline? Russia's dependence on imported labor is escalating. This dependence signals a critical shift. Russia is actively replacing its own citizens with foreign workers to cover 800,000 missing jobs in industries from electronics to construction. The country's once proud claim of sovereignty is quietly fading in these factories. Yet, the darkest revelation lurks far beyond factory walls, within the trenches of Ukraine. Shocking reports allege that some imported workers, promised employment, are being sent directly into combat zones. A leaked video offers brutal confirmation. Indian workers, speaking often in distress, say they realize how bleak their fate is. One describes the cruel reality: many of their peers have died or gone missing. The Indian government's indifference is clear. As if their lives are disposable pawns. These workers, lured by promises of work, are now caught in a deadly game. Stories emerge of friends who signed contracts with Russian military authorities, only to be thrown into battles near Pokrovsk. 10 days later, some reported missing or dead. Why? Because they received no proper training, thrown into a war zone without preparation. What's even more alarming is the scale of this human tragedy. The mass recruitment from India appears to feed a broader geopolitical bargain. Putin's visit to India and relaxed travel rules seem to open a backdoor trade, one that risks lives and fuels conflict in Ukraine. Could bargaining chips be exchanged in oil, diamonds, or political favors? Power, profit, and death collide in these dark corridors. Behind these scenes, Russia's factories are no longer symbols of strength but of desperation. Meanwhile, young men from India, lured by promises of prosperity, face the brutality of war they had no idea awaited them. How many more will fall before this conspiracy is exposed? And what will become of the workers caught in this hidden war? The story started with dancing in Red Square. Now, it's ending in the shadows of battlefield trenches, an untold tragedy of compelled labor and catastrophic betrayal. The story begins with a somber warning: nations are becoming pawns in a dangerous game, where human lives are collateral. Imagine a young Indian man, sitting in a cramped room, the scent of spices lingering in the air, as he recounts his friend's tragic fate. Just 10 days after signing a contract with the Russian Ministry of Defense, hopes of earning money turned into a nightmare. What really happened? His voice trembles as he reveals that his friend, shipped off to the most brutal zones near Pokrovsk, lost his life. The cruel truth is, he had no military training. These men arrived in Russia, aspiring workers or students, only to be thrown into the chaos of war. Had they been told the truth? Was this part of some larger scheme? The young man's words strike a chilling chord. His friend is now listed among the missing, a ghost lost in a conflict he never wanted. And he's not alone, 5 others who signed the same contracts met similar fates. The evidence paints a disturbing picture. Behind the scenes, Russia's strategy becomes clear. These workers are being sent to fill gaps in industry and infrastructure, but also to bolster a depleted front line. The lines between civilian labor and wartime soldiers blur. Could this be a dark result of high-level diplomacy? Putin's visit to India, the visa-free travel agreement, are they just smokescreens hiding the truth? And what drives this dangerous strategy? Russia's economy is bleeding under Western sanctions. The need for labor and cheap soldiers is urgent, vital to its survival and military efforts. Meanwhile, India's government seems to benefit too, gaining concessions on Russian oil, diamonds, and fertilizer. But at what cost? The blood of young men, sent with false promises, fighting battles they barely understood, far from home, and without proper training. Some reports suggest a portion of this workforce is being diverted straight to Ukraine's trenches. Imagine the deafening roar of artillery, the icy ground beneath their feet, the acrid smell of gunpowder filling their lungs. Silence replaced the chaos as these workers become pawns, unwittingly sacrificed. Could Putin be using them as cheap soldiers, pawns in a larger geopolitical chess game with Modi? Is the international community turning a blind eye, accepting this grim trade-off? In those remote trenches, amid mud and rusted machinery, the grim reality unfolds. What began in Red Square's festive dances is ending in harrowing silence, with stories of deceit, desperation, and loss echoing through war-torn lands. The stark truth is, the future of many nations hinges on this cruel exchange. Workers turned soldiers, hopes shattered, lives lost, all under a shroud of political deception. The story that began with cheerful dance scenes on Red Square is now descending into a grim reality, one painted in the trenches of Donetsk. The grand vision of a greater Russia, once celebrated in Moscow's historic heart, is now being upheld not by its own citizens but by imported workers lured by promises of wealth. These newcomers are being deceived, sent to the front lines with no understanding of what awaits them. The Kremlin's gamble is reshaping the country's very fabric, its population, its future, its integrity. This massive influx of over 1 million foreign workers is not just a labor move, it's a stark admission of systemic collapse. The factories still hum with activity, but the hands driving them are no longer Russian. Guns thunder in Ukraine, but increasingly, the triggers are pulled by foreign fingers. The dream of a resilient, independent nation is slipping away, replaced by reliance on external manpower. Putin's vision of strength is now being sustained by imported children, those who never signed up for war but are now fighting for survival. The true cost is beyond rubles or military casualties. A silent crisis erodes the nation's social and economic core. The Kremlin may be ignoring the warning signs, but the damage is unmistakable. The fabric of society is unraveling. The pathways of money and power are shifting. Once, Russian rubles circulated within Russian streets, lost in markets, spent on housing, fueling local businesses. Now, those funds vanish into distant lands, Mumbai, Delhi, Bangalore, draining Russia's reserves and replacing their value with foreign currency. This gamble's ripple effect is catastrophic. The country's economic arteries are bleeding, and its social ties are dissolving. Instead of strengthening Russia's future, this reliance on imported labor and deception is hollowing out its past. The war is not only fought on battlegrounds but deeper within the heart of Russia, its industries, its communities, its very identity. Each foreign worker is a reminder that what once was a mighty nation might only survive through borrowed strength, paid for with the lives of others and the decay of its own foundation. But as the smoke rises from factory stacks, it reveals a dire turn. Where do the wages fueling this output vanish? Once, those rubles from Russian workers stayed local, boosting grocery shelves and rents, keeping money circling within the homeland's veins. Yet now? Each paycheck handed to an Indian worker in Sverdlovsk or Ivanova? It slips straight out of Russia's grasp. No more local buzz of commerce, no familiar scent of street markets humming with trade. Instead, funds wire instantly to Mumbai, Delhi, Bangalore. Sanctions already drain Russia's reserves, and here, the Kremlin speeds it along, unaware? This hemorrhage bleeds the nation's currency controls dry. Shocking, isn't it? How Putin's strategy of survival turns into self-imposed exile of wealth. Dig deeper, and the cracks widen. Society frays at the seams. For years, the leader preached unity, against foreign foes, safeguarding the Russian soul. But what does a returning soldier witness now? Ghettos sprouting in his neighborhood, where his native tongue echoes only faintly, and unfamiliar spices waft from dormitory kitchens, clashing with the cold Moscow air. Fresh from the trauma of the Crocus City Hall horror, unchecked borders ignite rage among nationalists. Panic rises like a storm. Is this Fill the Gap's planned salvation, or a spark for ethnic clashes? Shadows of division lurk, ready to erupt within Russia's own walls. And it spills beyond streets, into diplomatic shadows. With every worker and soldier trade, Putin's authority crumbles further. Who's calling the shots now? In this waltz with Modi's India, the Russian bear follows, not leads. Climax twist, the war machine and mills now hang on New Delhi's whim. One call from Modi, flip the switch, and Russia's lines grind to silence. Brutal reckoning, dominance dreamed of, now a fragile thread dangling in dependency's grip. Will the hammer fall? Or rise again? Your heart races, as unforeseen alliances shatter illusions, leaving survival's bitter taste. The story of Moscow's heart, Red Square, begins with centuries of grandeur. The Kremlin walls once echoed with symbols of absolute power. But now, a different scene unfolds. Indian workers flood the historic square, not as tourists, but as a silent sign of Russia's crumbling independence. These scenes, seemingly carefree dances, stem from Putin's covert attempt to fill a deep void, that of a lost generation in Ukraine. But this is just the beginning. Much darker forces are at play. Hidden behind the cheerful images are signs of a shifting power, hands passing control quietly, almost invisibly. Factories, dormitories, and front lines are changing hands, hinting at a buried truth that goes beyond economics. Evidence from top sources suggests a shocking reality: some Indian workers aren't just filling jobs, they're being sent directly to Ukraine's trenches. The horrifying implications of this reach far deeper than anyone dreams. As we uncover this story, prepare for revelations that challenge everything you believe. Moscow's streets now echo with a new kind of noise: train whistles, clattering shoes, and the murmur of thousands of migrants. This isn't a casual crowd, it's a calculated wave of human migration. Imagine the sharp scent of spices filling narrow corridors, piled shoes, and hurried footsteps echoing in cramped dormitories. Over 10,000 Indian nationals stand in line at immigration offices, waiting for their documents. It's not chaos, it's a carefully orchestrated strategy. These migrants are the backbone of Russia's strained economy, brought in to fill critical gaps. Numbers swell to 27,000. With predictions reaching 40,000 more from India by 2026. The Kremlin's goal? A cheap, reliable workforce. But with Russian men at war, who's left to operate these factories? The answer reveals the stark truth: dependence on imported labor. Even the promise of 100,000 rubles per month, roughly $1,240, can't hide the reality: the ruble's value drops, inflation soars, and the supply of workers becomes a fragile illusion. Meanwhile, in the shadows, voices whisper of an even larger plan: up to 1 million Indian workers in Russia. Could this be the new face of a nation struggling to survive? Beneath this mass migration lies a disturbing secret: the human toll hidden behind factory walls and war zones. Indian workers, promised lucrative jobs, are increasingly being sent to Ukraine's front lines. Witnesses share chilling stories of contracts with military forces, bypassing military training. The sound of gunfire, the cold touch of mud, these are no longer just stories, but deadly realities. One young man describes his friend, who signed up for seemingly straightforward work. 10 days later, he was lost in a frontline hell of smoke and chaos, caught unprepared for the brutal violence of the Donetsk region. The words "no training" echo ominously. These workers, lured by promises of prosperity, are ending up as casualties, pawns in a deadly geopolitical game. The Indian government remains silent as lives are shattered and hopes are crushed. With each passing day, the river of human lives flows into an abyss, as the line between labor and war blurs like blood in the mud. How long can this tragic deception last? The story is far from over. As this hidden exchange continues, Russia's sovereignty begins to fade. Each migrant, each factory worker, each soldier sent into battle, are pieces of a fragile mosaic dissolving into chaos. Putin's grand vision of resurgence is now overshadowed by a bleak reality. Behind the scenes, the Kremlin is quietly selling its future to foreign interests, while its own citizens bear the deadly cost. The choice seems impossible: withdraw Indian workers and weaken the front, or imprison them in a war they were misled into fighting, an act that erodes Russia's independence. It's a silent surrender, a betrayal on a scale never seen before. The once proud Russian Empire now depends on alliances forged in deception and hardship. As the sounds of war and migration echo through the corridors of power, the question remains: who truly controls this shattered nation? And what will be left when the dust settles? The stakes have never been higher, and the truth burns brighter than ever. Putin has dismantled Russia's strength, transforming it into a mere supplier of cheap labor for Asia and a shadow of its former diplomatic self while pursuing Ukraine. The conflict is no longer just fought beyond borders, it has seeped into Russia's very soul. This isn't just a war, it's the quiet erosion of a nation's identity. What do you think about this shocking transformation? Share your thoughts below.